Hi! This time I want to talk about how you can teach others how to play role-playing games through roleplay with minimal effort. I also want to talk about some ways in which you can promote roleplay during your sessions. Before we begin, I want to talk about this channel's sponsor, Heroes and Hardships. This is a universal RPG system, allowing you to play any sort of campaign, genre, story, any sort of scenario. You can create any sort of character imaginable. You have hundreds of tools to assist you with that. I'm going to put a few links in the description of this video that will take you to the Kickstarter that should begin in about a month or so. They will also take you to the website, to the Tetsubo section of the website. Tetsubo is an upcoming setting inspired by Japan's Sengoku era. That's for Heroes and Hardships as well. And I'm going to put links to my reviews of the Quickstart guide and the Wallace campaign setting based on the life and exploits of William Wallace. So please check it out. I would also like to tell you that I have created a playlist containing tips and advice on how to play RPGs. The link will also be in the description. Okay, let's get started. Teaching others how to roleplay is quite simple. Just choose any RPG that you like and that the players like, of course. Let's say that you are introducing people to RPGs, people that have never played a role-playing game before. You just need to select a role-playing game that strikes their fancy, that they like. Perhaps they like a certain sort of story, fantasy, science fiction, horror games, etc. Any sort of thing that they like, there is a role-playing game for that. But that's more of a technical nuance. I want to focus more on getting your players into roleplay right away while learning the system. When you lead them through the character creation process, they are going to learn many things about that RPG as they write down the attributes, the skills, the powers, spells. You can just give them a brief description of each section just so that they get a general idea of how things will proceed. So when you are writing down initiative, you can tell them, in case that system handles initiative, you can tell them that that's a number or a value that they need to keep in mind because they are going to be rolling dice and the highest number goes first. And things like that. Very simple. Once you start with the scenario, and after you have told them that a role-playing game consists of a game master, that is yourself, or referee, or whatever, describing the situation, you're going to be presenting different situations, challenges to the players, and they will have to act or react according to those situations, descriptions, narrations, and it's a back and forth between you and the players. So that's a pretty simple concept to understand. But a lot of people still get caught in the board game mentality. They want to play role-playing games as if it were a board game. But they need to connect that concept that you are playing a role play, and you are also playing a game. Role-playing game. So you could say something like, you are deep in the jungle. You see the entrance to a cave. And then the players are going to say something like, I'm going to pull out my flashlight and I bring out my revolver and I move cautiously forward. And then you keep on going with the description. As a game master, you tell them, you start walking into the cave. But what's that? Something catches your attention. From the corner of your eye, you see this humanoid charging at you. It looks like a mutated gorilla and it's holding a club in its right hand. Roll initiative. And then the player is going to roll the D20 or any sort of system that you are handling. Perhaps it's a D100 system, anything. And you indicate that, the player indicates that he or she rolled an 18, let's say. And you rolled for the humanoid and you got a 12. And that way you don't have to explain many things. You tell the player, you got 18 in initiative, you go first. So the player describes, because you have previously explained to the player that you are presenting challenges and they need to take care of those challenges. They don't need to get too technical with the description or narration. The player could say something like, I'm shooting at the gorilla with my revolver. And then you tell the player, roll a d20 and add your shooting modifier or your attack value. And so the player rolls the dice, adds the modifier, and you tell the player if it's a hit, and so forth. It's very simple, and you are promoting roleplay. Once the encounter is over, perhaps the adventurers or the single adventurer, in case it's a one-on-one scenario, finishes off the enemy, then you can give further details to the cave. Now you notice that the cave is covered in strange glyphs that you at first did not see. And now, because of in a real fight situation, when you are in combat, sometimes you get a bit of a tunnel vision. So that will be a good excuse to hide some details from the player in the case of an ambush situation. In this case, because the player was advancing with the flashlight and the revolver drawn and carefully entering the cave, the player managed to roll initiative, got the chance to react to the attack. But if the player was careless and the player character went into the cave without the revolver at the ready and without the flashlight and just walking quite carelessly, it could have been an automatic action, or rather a free action, as a surprise action on the part of this gorilla type of enemy. But that way you encourage roleplay, because the player understands that every action counts, and it's as if the player is actually there within the adventure. So it's pretty simple, very simple enough. That way the player is not programmed to ask questions of the game master, because the dungeon master, game master, referee does not exist within the game world. Please check out my video in the playlist in the description, where I talk about how the dungeon master doesn't exist. Now let's move on to promote roleplay in sessions. There are sometimes, well, it depends on the role-playing game that you are playing. Maybe you are playing an RPG that tries to simulate things that you would see in a comic book or in a movie, or it's a simulationist RPG, sort of like a second life experience where you feel as if you are actually living the life of, let's say, a person living in 1400s England. And so maybe it's that style of play. Maybe it's a role-playing game that tries to simulate anime. So you need to be quite familiar with the tropes of that particular RPG and the genre it is trying to represent. And you need to reward, in my opinion, to promote roleplay, you need to reward the players when they are trying to present certain trappings, tropes, sensibilities related to a particular story, genre, etc. So maybe you are playing a comic book RPG. You know how heroes and villains sometimes talk too much. They insert these unnecessary pieces of dialogue. And if the players do that, perhaps you are fighting, the player is fighting this villain called Sticky Man or Glue Man or whatever. And the player scores a solid blow or hit against this villain, Sticky Man. And the player could say something like, that's what happens to you when you stick around. You know, those cheesy, corny one-liners. And you can reward experience points or modifiers to that player, because that player is promoting the genre. It's coming alive through that RPG session. Perhaps you are playing an anime RPG. So every time the player says something like, Nani or Masaka, or maybe you're not playing in Japanese, maybe you're playing in English, you could still use those. Sometimes in anime they don't complete their sentences. So they say something like, could it be that? It cannot possibly be. And when they start to get into the spirit of the genre, you can award experience points, perhaps depending on the system. Maybe you have some sort of fate points or bennies or something like that. You can award that. You can use those points to reward the player for really getting into the spirit of the game. If it's a simulationist type of game, perhaps, like Hackmaster, Legend Quest, Hardmaster even, those role-playing games sometimes get really detailed, especially in the case of Hard Master. When it comes to the maps, they are highly detailed. They are basically there to promote that simulationist style. So anything that the player does, even Dungeons and Dragons has this, that you see all of these lists of different objects and animals and different beverages, food. The particular things or quirks or anything related to the background, the personality of the character should be rewarded. Any sort of purchase or any action that at first seems unnecessary should be rewarded to promote not only roleplay but immersion. So let's say that you have a character that is constantly purchasing these wooden figurines. He collects wooden figures, and every time you get to town, he spends a bit of money purchasing those figurines. Some more like mechanically oriented or power gamer sort of players may consider it at first a waste, because you could be spending that money in other things, perhaps potions or rations or whatever. But because you are showcasing an aspect of that player character, it adds to the immersion, to the roleplay. So the game master or dungeon master, in my opinion, should present some experience point rewards for that sort of style. Maybe you are playing a modern RPG and the character has a favorite brand of cigarettes. Maybe the character is an addict and he needs to constantly purchase this brand of cigarettes, dromedary, let's call it like that. And he's always looking to spend money on that. And when an encounter starts, he always takes a bit of time to light a cigarette. Maybe it's about a gunfight is about to begin, or maybe a melee fight. It could be any situation, and the character first lights his cigarette. Maybe it's a diplomacy situation, and you don't know if things are going to escalate into a battle, and he still lights his cigarette, and you can have some interesting exchanges of dialogue because of that. In the manga, what's the name? Fist of the Clear Sky. It's the sort of like a prequel to Fist of the North Star. There is this moment when the main character is smoking a cigarette and he's about to fight with another character. So sort of like a cage match. And the enemy tells him, well, it's kind of like a clandestine cage match. And his adversary is kind of like, you're being disrespectful for smoking inside of this holy ground of battle or something like that. And the main character says, this is not a cigarette, this is incense for your funeral. So you see, you have those amazing moments. So anything that the players are trying to do to heighten that sort of the spirit of the genre, the sort of story that you are creating with your actions and interactions, you should reward that. Now, what happens when the players get into that habit? I personally would consider it just like a flaw in gameplay, that they are constantly asking questions to the game master or dungeon master instead of discovering that information through the roleplay, through the actions of their characters. I would say that it's the fault. If your players are doing that, it's your own fault as a game master or dungeon master, because you are catering to their bad habits or vices, you could say. So if a player tells you, can my character, you could say something like, I don't know, can he? Or just like you don't know, make, even if it's an awkward moment of silence, just shrug it off like, I don't know. So that way the player is going to feel like it's a bit his fault, because he's creating those clumsy moments, those bumps, those stuttery moments during gameplay, because he is not attempting something with his or her character. He's slowing down gameplay, he's interrupting the experience, and they will stop doing it. You should talk about that. If there are too many moments like that at the end of the session, you can encourage the player, tell him or her that If you want to know something, if you want to attempt something, just do it. Just try it. There will be consequences, just like in real life. If you're going to jump into the lava, you probably won't survive unless you're playing as a sort of super powered game, very over the top. Maybe you will take damage from it, but there will be consequences to actions. And when a player is constantly asking questions, he basically wants to play in easy mode. He wants the game master to tell him or her that the action is going to be successful or if it's going to be a failure. Because you can attempt anything. You don't need to ask if you can do this or that. You can do it. Or rather, you can attempt it. But will you be successful? Perhaps it's an automatic success, depending on the situation. Perhaps you need to roll the dice. In the case of jumping into the lava, it's probably going to be an automatic failure. Or well, unless you wanted to kill yourself, then it's going to be a success. So that way you will encourage roleplay. So I hope this video was informative or helpful. Like I've said before, I'm not telling you, even though my playlist has the title of How to Play Role-Playing Games, I'm not exactly telling you how to play. I am telling you how I play role-playing games and how I would consider, what I would consider the correct way of playing a role-playing games with roleplay. You can still have those gaming elements. It is a role-playing game after all. You can still roll the dice, you can have maps and minis if you want, all of those different cool powers and abilities, and when you level up, you obtain all of those amazing features for your character, you start to become more and more powerful, depending on the system of course. But I definitely recommend that if you want to get people into roleplay, get them into role-playing games, get them to roleplay right away. Like I said, they don't need to know the rules. You just need to tell them what they need to roll. Oh, the player says something like, I want to climb up that rope. Okay, roll this stat or roll this skill. Maybe you have like a climbing skill. Roll that skill. And you indicate the modifiers and that's it. And that's why, for example, you may remember from my video, Crouching Gygax Hidden Arneson, that's why sessions were so magical with Dave Arneson. When Gary Gygax, Rob Kuntz, Dave McGarry, they played that first Blackmoor campaign, Blackmoor adventure with Dave Arneson many years back, they didn't know how to play at all. Dave Arneson presented the situation. Nobody knew the rules. Nobody knew anything about what would be considered the concept of Dungeons and Dragons. It wasn't even a draft. It was a concept in the mind of Dave Arneson, because it was successful because he was able to handle everything via roleplay. He presented a situation. The players decided what to do. They did this or that, or said this or that. They attacked this enemy, etc. And Dave Arneson would tell them, roll this die. And it will be a hit, it will be a miss, it will be successful. Sometimes there will be automatic successes or failures. So everything was handled via roleplay and rulings. Remember that I also made a video about rulings. You will find it in the playlist. And that's how things were quite exciting. Not only because of the rulings, because they didn't know how Dave Arneson was going to handle this encounter. The way that things proceeded in the previous encounter would potentially be quite different in the next encounter. But besides that, everything was handled via roleplay. There weren't those sorts of interruptions in the case of learning the system to see how they could attempt something, how the mechanics of the game worked. Everything was through narration and description. And of course, I wasn't there. I am just basing my thoughts on what I have learned of them. I recommend the Secrets of Blackmoor documentary and any book, pretty much any book talking about the origins of Dungeons and Dragons. They will describe some of those moments. But going back to our current times, encourage roleplay. The mechanics are there to support roleplay. The storytelling will happen organically. It will unfold through the actions and reactions. and the consequences of what may happen during the session. Well, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for your comments and your likes. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support this channel. If anyone else wishes to support this channel further still, because you are still watching my videos, and I'm very thankful for that. But if you want to go further, the information will be in the description. You can send an Amazon gift card or a drive-thru RPG gift certificate. Once again, thank you, and see you later.